This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode of Dig Me Out 90s and Aughts Rock. Thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. Join the union to vote on albums, pick one to discuss with us on the show, get access to bonus episodes in our private Discord community. Keep the podcast ad-free and make the next episode happen by joining us at digmeoutpodcast.com. Joining us this week, you may know him from previous episodes, such as, well, let's see, we've got, what did we do last year? My thing is frozen now.
Was it Underworld last year?
Yes, Underworld, second toughest of the infants. Okay, it was frozen for a second, then as soon as you said it, it popped up. Before that, we did, or not before that, but in previous years, we've done Dirty Hearts, Full Moon by In Excess.
Full Moon, Dirty Hearts, yeah.
Full Moon, Dirty Hearts, yeah. Blasting Off by Red Lorry, Yellow Lorry. Double Allergic by Powderfinger, Mint 400 by Ammonia, and Less is More by Even. I think that's all of them. Welcome back to the show. I think
there was a UMI in there, or was that someone else? Anyway, you're probably right.
There's a couple UMIs, but I'll have to look up who suggested those. Darren Leach, welcome back to the show. Wearing the T-shirt of the band.
I'm on brand
We're on brand.
I'm wearing the band's T-shirt. So,
for people without video, will you please share the band and album you've selected for this episode?
So this is my first into the noughties. It's a Swedish band called Cut City, and the album's called Exit Decades, released in 2007.
And I immediately got this band mixed up with Cut Copy, which is another band around the same time.
And you put it
cutting happening.
You put it in the episode like invite. So as I'm preparing for this, I'm looking for Cut Copy Exit Decades. I'm like, that doesn't exist. What is he talking about?
It's so confusing. How did you discover this band? Because they're not super well known.
No. So I discovered Exit Decades in the late 2000s. So even though it was released in 2007, so it was in the middle of my sort of post-punk, phase. I'm trying to figure out which, say, modern bands at the time, of course, were carrying that kind of sound forward. I distinctly remember finding it on a blog, which had a cheeky download. I remember that much. And I bought the vinyl later for everyone who, comments below. I moved to London in 2005. And so, there's bands like Interpol, Bloc Party, Maximo Park, Franz Ferdinand, Editors, all these were, keeping that kind of sound alive. And I'm just trying to find the next band in that ilk, because 2007 I feel was when, say, Interpol was changing their sound, Editors kind of were changing their sound, and then this came in. I just really like that sound. I actually end up working backwards into the roots later on. So I saw Gang of Four in 2012, and eventually I discovered like the Chameleons and then bands like Sound. So I've kept the post-punk flame alive. So I discovered this late 2000, I'd say 2009, 2010, something around that time. So, but it's they never really toured outside Sweden, and they never toured the UK. So they never they never really pushed their sound. So that's why it's kind of obscure, I suppose.
For some reason, I felt like I had seen the album artwork, but there's probably no way I could have, unless it was, an MP3 blog back in the day, because they used to have all those MP3 blogs that would throw up a single of the day, and it would usually be stuff that was not on any major label, which this was not. So it's possible that I saw it back then, but I don't remember ever hearing or seeing this band. Jay, any recollection?
No, I'm a little surprised because I, have a sweet spot for Swedish bands, so I tend to know a good range of different Swedish artists from the late 90s to this era. But no, I never heard of this band.
Well, they don't have a Wikipedia, but there is some background information. And if you know anything, Darren, feel free to fill it in, but formed in 2002 and ended up joining a label called Deleted Art. And they put out a 4-song EP later with on a California label called Gold Standard Labs label, which Gold Standard had like Mars Volta and The Locust, stuff like that. The debut, which we're talking about, Exit Decades, was released in February 2007. It was released on Gold Standard, and then the vinyl version was released on Deleted Art. And then in 2012, they released their second album, Where's the Harm in Dreams Disarmed. A little bit of a tongue twister there. And then there's a 10-year break, and in 2022, Tape Days comes out, and in 2023, Honeymoon at the Barricades. Honeymoon at the Barricades. They have the word honeymoon broken up on the title or the album artwork, so it looks like honey and then moon, which is not how I'm used to seeing that spelled. Unless I guess the moon is made of honey, which is concerning. It'd be
delicious.
Would probably just crash into us then. We'd be
I'm glad they came back. Yeah, because I know because they didn't really tour the second album. I think they released it and then broke up, things like that. And so I was a bit disappointed, but obviously I still had the music. But yes, you're right. They did reform. And also they're in another band called Missiles. So I think one of my favorite albums of last year was one of the Missiles album. Put that in my top 10. More of a punk sound, shorter songs, things like that. Still indebted kind of in that punk, post-punk kind of sound, but quite different. So if you like this, you will like Missiles as well.
They have not really kept updated on the internet. Their website
terrible.
Was not updated. Has not been updated since 2014. Their MySpace page has not been updated in quite some time. That's disappointing. You got to keep that MySpace page updated. They do have a Bandcamp page where you can find all their music, and then they have a Facebook page.
Which, they're good on Facebook.
Yeah,
to be fair.
They do keep that updated.
Yeah.
Let's get into some comments over at the Patreon. Gavin said, "If I've never heard of these guys, but I enjoyed it. Nothing really jumped out ahead of anything else, but it's short and feels like a grower to me. Worthy." Patrick Testa said, "I remember when so many young bands discovered early U2 and peak era Cure. This wasn't the dawn of aping the gnarly 80s that is still going strong today. The Strokes might have kickstarted that scene, but by the mid-aughts, it was totally rad and full on. Cut City certainly seemed to also channel Bowie as one of their mixers. Next phase, new wave, dance craze. Anyways, it's still bodacious to me." Is he quoting Billy Joel there?
Yeah.
Nice, Patrick. Way to bring in some Billy Joel. Have to tie it into our Attila podcast over on the Metal podcast. We will share the poll results of Worthy Album, Better EP, and Decent Single later in the show when we share our judgment. But let's talk about the album. Jay, what works for you on Exit Decades by Cut City?
I love the formula this band is in. It's familiar if you're into Interpol, from the early 2000s. It sounds familiar to that. Obviously, they're pulling early 80s post-punk and punk, which I think was super interesting at the time, right? We weren't hearing any of that really in the 90s. And I think what I liked about it, it's not something I was into the 80s. So for me, it's sort of, I was experiencing it the first time in the 90s, or I'm sorry, in the early 2000s, and with bands like this. And as I got into this record, I could start to pull apart why I, found this sound so interesting and still do now, because you've got this, I think, tension between these downstrumming sections and this kind of stilted aspect of it, but then it's very performed. You know, it's very expressive. It's obviously people playing all of this stuff. So you get this, you know, almost mechanical sounding at times, lock up between, you know, the downstrumming bass and guitars and drums, but then contrasting that with dynamics that, you know, shift to, you know, the bass and the drums being a little bit more broken and offbeat, and the, you know, the guitar still driving. And then interspersed with that, you have a vocal delivery that's, you know, sort of in that Joy Division Interpol space where it's very rhythmic, kind of, you know, a deeper tone, and can float between being a little croony to just being like one of the other instruments. And I think that works really well because then you can do these dynamics where, you know, there's songs on here where they can do kind of call response. So something like Manoevres or Damaged, where the bass and the guitar and the vocal are like trading lines almost. And then they can lock together and all sort of just be like propulsive and super straightforward, and then cut to being a little more broken. So you end up with this, I think, really cool dynamic between all the players in the band, you know, kind of responding to each other, driving each other, locking up and sounding big. And then I think the the fourth element of this is when they provide space, it gets like almost poetic sounding vocally. You know, you can like deliver lines that carry a weight on their own, and then the rest of the band kind of steps back, and, you know, maybe keys come in or the guitars are a little bit sparser. You know, so it really kind of within this formula, they can do quite a bit in terms of, you know, keeping these songs interesting, kind of playing with your brain a little bit, with it feeling a bit like mechanical without it being electronic. And the whole thing, I think at the end reading like, oh, these are players all playing off of each other. You know, it's not programmed. It's not, even though there's aspects of it that can start to feel a little mechanical. So I just like that tension it creates. You know, it reminded me of the bands I mentioned, but then also when I think it opens up a bit, I haven't heard things like Suede in here, you know, where when he croons a little bit more and the vocals a little more melodic. I heard bands like Placebo, you know, if you're into that sound, where it's maybe a little bit more on the alt rocky side. When, you know, towards the second half of the record, the songs get a bit more like pop songwriting in terms of like clearer verses and choruses and dynamics, which that reminded me a bit more of something like Placebo. So it was also in a, you know, branched off into some of these others like 90s alternative bands that I liked too, not just the post-punk stuff. So yeah, I like the formula here. I like the sounds, I like the vocal style a lot, and I like the performances. Drunken eyes waste on. These are the days that we get. These are the days that we get. These are the days that we get. You gotta lay down your arms. Sometimes higher hands are just that. These are the days that we get. These are the days that we get. These are the days that we get. You gotta lay down your arms. So that's what worked for me. How about you, Tim?
Well, I'm a sucker for the baritone,
Yeah.
you know, post-punk vocal that is on this record that you hear on the Sound albums. And I mean, Richard Butler of the Psychedelic Furs had that sound. It's just an interesting vocal approach because I've heard it described as like it's like a crooner on speed. Like it's really like a Frank Sinatra crooner, but it's being delivered really fast and intense.
Yeah.
So, and I pairing that with the insistent bass line that always is in a post-punk style band like this. I just love the drive of the songs. You mentioned the guitar play of playing, like you said I think it was Damage, where there's a little guitar line and then there's a vocal and there's a guitar line.
Mm-hmm.
And I really miss that style of guitar riff where I was listening to some stuff like Hot Rod Circuit recently and some other bands that, there's guitar leads, but they're not solos and they're not showy. They're just like these really interesting runs that are happening in songs. Sometimes it can be just like one or two notes that are just being bent in a weird way, making them a little dissonant. But that like scratches the itch that I need sometimes, where I want a little bit of weirdness or dissonance in what are, in a lot of ways, these are fairly straightforward, structured and arranged songs. You open with like a verse and a chorus and a verse and a chorus, and maybe we'll get like a breakdown or a bridge section, but it's pretty much standard arrangement. It's what you can do within those arrangements and make things pop that I find really interesting. The comparisons to the other like post-punk revival bands of the 2000s make sense. There's a little bit more, I think, energy to this than like an Interpol. Interpol like to really go into the maudlin, slow kind of sound, especially on the first record, which I absolutely love that record, but it's got to be a mood for me now. Like it's not an everyday listen like it was back then. But some people were mentioning like the Strokes, and I don't hear the Strokes at all. The Strokes are way more garage, jangly, and this to me is sleeker than that. It's like the difference between like a sports car and just a regular sedan. Like there's an energy here that's pushing, and also more of a darkness. The obvious connection is like Joy Division, but I don't think you get the aggressively anti-pop of Joy Division with regards to both lyrical content and the sound. There's no songs that sound like you're in a funeral march like you do with some Joy Division songs. You're like, oh, we're heading into hell. This song is terrifying, how dark it is. Whereas this reminds me much more of a band like The Sound or Interpol, those finding the really interesting guitar hooks, establishing pretty, these aren't like hooky songs, but they're memorable in that I remember lines and I remember leads and I remember just little parts here and there, so that the vocals are less important as delivering the hook than they are as almost just another instrument that is a part of the overall picture.
Are you running far from enemies or subtleties? There's such verve, such nerve, so you send them all away. Let them wait for the sake of waiting. They disappear in your
So that's what worked for me. Darren, you brought this to us. What works for you on this record?
Well, just to start with the Joy Division thing, yes, you can easily just say that, but it's a bit lazy when you think about it, because I read an interview. They said, one of the members said, we didn't grow up listening to Joy Division, but they did listen to the sound. So well done, spot on. And I can hear that. And I discovered the sound only about 5 or 6 years ago. So how I didn't find out about them when I discovered the Chameleons, I have no idea, because I find them pretty similar bands. But I discovered Chameleons in 2013, 14 or something like that. So, yeah. I find, you mentioned the bass, I find this incredibly important because, it isn't just merely filling that bottom end, it acts as a melodic anchor to me, and it just stands out. But what really stands out for me is the mix. Like, every instrument and vocal sits at the right level for me. Nothing drowns anything out. Nothing's pushed to the back, things like that. You can hear that balance clearly on tracks like Ashes, like Millions and such Verve. And I think what brought me to the sound of post-punk, it's the guitar tone. Like that, there's something about it's so infectious. And I can hear that in a track called Rival Trial. It's driven mostly by bass and drums, but they only deploy the guitar at the key moments, for that maximum impact. So the guitarist isn't going, oh, let me just play throughout the whole thing. He's mates with the band. He's going, I'll just bring in the guitar here and there. And for me, less is more. Yeah, so I find that, and for me, the album isn't one-dimensional either. Like the penultimate track, just Pornography, to me it plays out almost like this atmospheric post-punk ballad. It's haunting and gives the record, real depth.
I would agree with that. I like the atmospheric sound of that, especially after you mentioned such Verve, which I think is one of the better tracks on the record. It's just got that like propulsion, and even though that lead guitar is not complicated, the way that they're able to affect it and the stuff that he does, like it's simple, but it's also like super specific. Like a bad band would mess that up. Like it'd be too delayed or something like that. But it reminded me of, like, if you think of like the Best Editors song, like that, to me, it has that vibe where you get that just like perfect combination of delay and distortion. And I don't know if there's maybe like something else on there, something else to spice it up, but I just love that sound.
Yeah, it leans into the like it starts to create these overtones, the way that they're using the delays. Particularly on that. And I just think the vocal approach here, it puts a lot of requirement on the bass and the dynamics to make it all work, because that has to just fill space, and you have to like be melodic or know when to be melodic. And I think they step up here. I think the effects help that too. We're talking about delays. There's also, a decent amount of keyboard stuff going on here that also adds to those overtones. So you get like, what can be a, fairly dry bass and drum sound, but then you get all of this richness from all these effects and, the synths and things that are going on, which I think fill out the sound and make it all work.
Yeah. And you're pointing out the bass sort of filling in, like on Numb Boys, there's a part of the verse where he kind of does this da 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 part, and the bass plays notes that are in the same, he's like following the pattern but not the same notes. So it almost acts like a counter melody to what the vocal's doing. So it's just a nice little like tasty nugget that some bass players might just play straight through or play it match him, but the fact you're getting like little things that are off but are in the same, I guess it'd be in the same key, that to me like is the sign of they were paying attention to all the little parts and pieces when putting them together.
Yeah, I noticed like even drums are smart. Like Rival Trial is a good example where the bed of that is on this kind of like broken drum thing where it has this fill in it and it's a little stilted sounding. And that, as a drummer, is tricky because it can be fun to play, but then through the course of the verse, you kind of get stuck in that. You know, it's like it starts to, and then it becomes difficult, I think, for people like your brain to keep up with that. It's just too much of it. So they're clever about, he knows to like take a break from it. And then he just kind of just goes to this, like they break and he just goes to this kick drum groove that they kind of like let things settle for a minute. And then they come back to it to give your just brain a little bit of a rest. And then it becomes, right, you re-engage with that stilted kind of rhythm. So it's just clever in terms of knowing, you know, hey, we're going to do something here. It's a little bit more challenging. It's not as danceable as maybe the song before it. But like, let's not lose people. Let's like, you know, give them a break for, 10, 15 seconds and then come back and you appreciate, thinking through the dynamics that way as a listener.
Is that an exhausting drum part to play? It sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it would be.
Because it's like,
and it's also just hard. Like it's a groove you get into, and then once your brain gets into it, you could probably like, muscle memory just takes over and you keep playing it. But then it's also not intuitive how to get out of that. Like, how do I switch to another part? Because it's so specific and kind of stilted. So I think it's a clever concept of just like, okay, I'm just gonna like stop and just lean into the kick drum,
right,
and just like reset it, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is kind of like a reset.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, pause,
right.
catch your breath. Now let's go again.
Everybody, like literally, like the drummer.
Yeah, the whole band is like
taking a beat.
All right, because it's so intense.
Yeah.
Is there anything that doesn't work for you on the record, Jay?
Well, it's interesting. Like, it's a very, very short album. Right, we're only at 34 minutes here, which is good. 9 tracks. It's not. It doesn't feel as complex as maybe Interpol is, or diverse. You mentioned like Interpol will go on like half the record is fairly slow, and they pull that off well. They don't do that, which I appreciate. Right, so you got the short record that's pretty high energy through the whole thing. To me, that starts to feel like, okay, we should really be honing our hooks here. And I think there are some hooky moments, but it takes a while to really establish them. I think they could be stronger though. Like if you're going to go for like, hey, we're going to do a short 34-minute record. We're not going to do slow material. We're going to try to keep the energy up, really lean into the dynamics. I think you really got to deliver on some little brainworms that stick with you. Vocally in particular, I think the ones that do stick are more guitar oriented. And I think the vocals are good. I'm just not left with those lines. Like when you listen to that first Interpol record, like you just leave that album like with those quirky, his delivery, and just they either beat them into you or they set them up so well that when they deliver them, like your brain just absorbs them and you walk away remembering them. I had a hard time when I left this record really, hearing anything in my mind, or I generally remembered the sound of the band, but there were no big vocal hooks or melodies that really stuck with me. And I just think for a 34-minute record that's trying to be, sort of exciting and compact, that it's going to be crucial that you deliver some of those. And they get close. There's some songs on here that are, pretty catchy, but they're not vocally catchy. So right. I think that's my biggest, I guess, what doesn't work in kind of my wish list item, that if they could just amp up a little bit more would make it a much more a stronger, successful album for me. How about you? Anything not work?
I think you nailed it right there. Like the lack of a quirky hook, not in a jokey way, but like when I hear Paul Banks sing, "We have 200 couches, you can sleep," right. And I'm like, what the hell does that mean?
Right.
Or when he or something that's more visual, like the subway is a porno, and I'm like, oh, that's an interesting thought. And that doesn't happen on this record in the same way. It becomes more of just a complete like audio experience of just enjoying the whole song, as opposed to coming back to a particular strange line that catches you off guard. That's the only thing I was really missing, was just like that one little quirky thing in a song where I go, oh, that's such a weird but cool way to say it. Like, I don't know what that means. And I'm maybe just fit the rhyme scheme. Maybe it doesn't mean anything, but that's okay because it's catchy. So I like you. I think if there was just a little bit more in the hook department from the vocals, I wouldn't have to rely on the music to be as much, and the music would be more of in support. But that, it's not. I don't think it's going to affect my overall enjoyment of the record, because it's such, like you said, such a short record.
Yep.
I think they did release a longer version with 2 extra demos or something like that. You can get on their Bandcamp, but for 2007, a 34-minute long record, that is crazy. I'm surprised they didn't name it an EP, because that's pretty short. But Darren, anything that worked for you on the album?
Just to defend them a little bit, don't forget they're Swedish and English isn't their first language.
That's true.
Yeah, so they're writing lyrics in English. So yeah, I get what you mean by the hook. I can't fault this because I have been listening to it for a while. I suppose if I had to fault them, you could argue they were kind of late to the party. I mentioned earlier that, Interpol editors were already changing their sound. And so, look, and they never toured the UK. So they never tried to break this album. So shame on them, really, because I love this record and I love their second one and everything they've done. Look, I don't know if it's a money thing. I'm not too sure if they just want to keep this a vanity project. Who knows? But because when you're thinking 2007, you had the new rave thing. The Klaxons was #1 album of the year, I think, here. So, and you got the horror things like that. So, but no, I like it. Like 9 tracks, 34 minutes. I listened to it a few times, obviously leading up to this, and before you know it, you're up to the last track, and the last track goes for like 6 minutes anyway. So yeah, I love it. Yeah, no, I can't really fault it. I kind of like that. Not many people know it, and I'm glad I'm pushing it out into the world so people can know about it a bit more. Just to add on more about the post-punk thing, but I feel the band is aware of the musical decades they're borrowing from. But I feel they're not trying. But they're trying to move beyond them. I feel, adding synths and keys and all that kind of thing, and a few more interesting sounds. It doesn't sound like Gang of Four or Joy Division, things like that. So, and I like the name Exit Decades. It sounds like they're making music heavily influenced, informed obviously by the late 70s, early 80s. While the album itself is called Exit Decades. So yeah.
It's interesting because I was looking at the release dates of various, like the first Interpol album came out in 2002, but then it's several years. Maximo Park, Bloc Party, The Bravery, Editors all came out in 2005, their debut albums. So they're 3 years behind what Interpol was doing. And then you get this record in 2007. So it is really like the second wave of this post-punk sound that kind of starts with Interpol. And I was thinking that Bloc Party was earlier, but they really were like 3 years after Interpol. So I'd be curious to like track all of that with regards to when various artists from this era released their debuts, because it's much more compacted to like the middle of the decade as opposed to the early part of the decade.
That's actually true. Yeah.
Which I thought was when it was. So in terms of, I don't even think this got released in the United. It had to have gotten released in the US because Gold Standard Laboratories put it out. So they did release it on CD in the US. It only came out on vinyl in France and Sweden. There was no vinyl in the US.
I'm glad they reissued that on vinyl later on, though. So 2019, because that original copy, you couldn't find them. And apparently, I think I've got a memory of a lot got damaged. So So a lot, I got thrown, or just probably just sitting in one of the band members' cupboards or something. But 2019 they issued it on clear colored vinyl.
Yeah, and if you want to get a copy and you're in the US, I mean, you might be able to grab a CD, but there's one that's like in a very good condition for like $6, and then the next after that you're paying like $15 for a CD, because I guess people just didn't get them here. They didn't buy them, so there's not that many copies. There's only 7 copies for sale, which I think if you went and looked at how many Interpol copies are available for sale, or especially this like second or third record, or Bloc Party, see there's a couple hundred. Not that those are bad records, but just like there were so many of them.
Exactly.
Where I imagine Cut City is a much harder thing to grab. So, but I'm like you, Jay, I'm surprised I didn't know this, because I was reading but I was reading the magazines that would have been covering this. Like your Big Takeover and your Enemy and those kind of things. And I was going to the MP3 blogs. So I don't know how this slipped through. When there were bands like more obscure bands like VHS and Beta that were like,
I love that first record.
Yeah, the first record is really great, but like I would say that this is not off from that. I mean, that one has a little bit more of a dance aspect, but it's in the same vein in a lot of respects.
I believe, wasn't that one on I was going to say VHS, on EMI or something, or Parlophone? Because when I moved to London in 2005, I got to see VHS or Beta play this very small show. And then they kind of disappeared after that. Yes, they had a couple of albums, but they never really got pushed, did they? Well,
the first record came out on a smaller record label first in 2002, and then it was re-released by Astral Works in 2005. After the release of Night on Fire, which I think is the one that most people know.
Yes.
That was released on Astralworks EMI in 2004. So they basically re-released their first album after the second album came out.
Oh,
because Le Funk, I don't think he was on a record label called
EP, though, wasn't it? Le Funk.
I think it was, but it's listed as an album on their discography.
Okay.
But it's only 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 4 album tracks and then 2 live tracks.
Yeah.
But that's definitely something I picked up off of like Napster or LimeWire in those days.
I'm happy to say I own that on vinyl. I'm very happy about that.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I definitely bought that at the time. I was very happy. So,
well, let's talk about our overall ratings on this album. Worthy album, better EP, or decent single? Jay, where do you land?
I'm in a worthy album. Sweet spot for me in terms of sound. Not a ton of, there's a handful of bands that I like that are doing this. So another one I can add to the catalog. It's so short, it's hard to fault it. Again, if I had a time machine, I'd go back and tell so many bands, make your albums shorter, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, in the CD era. It just helps so much to be able to enjoy it and appreciate it. Especially
Billy
now.
Corgan, calm your ass down.
Yeah. Especially with our limited attention span now, it really helps.
Yes.
I don't even have any songs. When I go through and do my notes, I highlight all the songs that I think are working. I have everything highlighted. There's no songs on here I would even cut or rearrange. So, and I think the hooks would probably, the more time I spend with this, will take hold and become more evident. It's a bit of a grower there. So yeah, it's a worthy album for me. Where you at, Tim?
Same. And again, I think you nailed it there. This is not an album that has a bad track. It's not an album that has a killer single that some of those other bands had, like The Bravery or like Elephant, and some of the other bands had like one killer single, and then you were like eased into the rest of the record. This one has just 9 really good songs, and there'll be some that I toss into my playlist, but it'll take repeated listens to like go, okay, I can identify that from the opening couple notes. So worthy album for me, Darren.
Definitely a worthy album for me. As I mentioned earlier, I love the mix so well. You can hear it all, especially the bass. Like I really love the bass on this. And urgent drums and the vocals, and nothing tries to outshine each other. And just to finish off with the post-punk definition, I find that the band, it was more of a sound, wasn't it? Sorry, it wasn't just the sound. It was an attitude, because original pop punk bands, they took the punk's simplicity and asked what else they could do with it. And I feel Cut Copy, there you go. Cut City. Boom. Cut City did that. They by adding strings and synths and things like that. So, yes, it sounds like the late 70s and 80s, but yeah, it does sound like the 2000s to me.
I think a lot of those albums that we're talking about are foundational. They don't sound great, and this sounds great. Like, just from a sonic standpoint, they're kind of tinny and like muddy, and this recording wasn't great at the time, and some of them didn't have huge budgets. This sounds fantastic, right? And I think that's what's so appealing to me about this era is, these bands going back and being inspired by that music and trying to reinvent it, but also like having the advantage of modern recording technology. So like you can hear everything, right? The bass tones are fantastic. The drums sound big and full. The guitar tones are great and rich. So.
Well, our patrons agreed 100% worthy album.
Boom.
We get that. We rarely get that. I mean, we get majority worthy albums, but 100%, that's not bad. In fact, that's pretty good.
Thanks, DMO.
So our community definitely likes the post punk. I'm not going to challenge that thought, but thank you for bringing this to us. This should have been in our wheelhouse, and it wasn't. So appreciate you adding it to our wheelhouse.
Yeah, I just try and give something kind of interesting. I know people knew about Underworld last year, but I just thought I got to throw that in because we kind of talk about more, let's just say, rock orientated albums like that. So I thought I'd throw that in, and and I'm glad we're now having albums from the noughts and 80s and things like that. So still got heaps from the 90s I'd like to throw in, but
sure,
there's such great albums from the noughts, from the noughties. So.
Well, it's cool that we can tie this to an album we talked about years ago, which was The Sounds from the Lion's Mouth, which we did as a bonus episode for.
I think I threw that in, didn't I?
It may be, but it's a perfect line there to go from, if you want to hear the sort of the origins of this sound with The Sound and obviously some of the other post-punk bands from that era, you can really hear the evolution that happens within a very specific sound. The sound has their own thing going on, and yes, there are things that Cut City are doing that are similar, but Cut City's also adding some aspects, and like Jay said, the production is better, so you're getting a better sound overall. I feel like I'm saying sound a lot because of the band The Sound. sound. Anyway,
and there's a Swedish band called The Sounds.
That's right.
It's even more
really?
Yeah.
I wonder if the sounds and the music ever played together.
At the Boring Festival?
Live.
At the festival?
Live, the sounds, the music.
At festival.
Yeah. Is there a band called Festival? There's got to be a band called Festival. We know there's bands called Free Beer. They idiots name their bands Free Beer for various reasons. Thank you again, Darren, for bringing something very interesting to us.
And I'll just add the second. I know they've released a few albums around these last few years, but their second album is actually my favorite of theirs. So definitely check out the next album.
You have to check that out. And if this episode brought back good memories and positive vibes, join us at digmeoutpodcast.com to explore our free archive of over 850 episodes, history of the band posts, and weekly new release roundups. Paid subscribers unlock bonus podcast episodes covering 70s, 80s, and aughts rocks, including the sound episode that I mentioned earlier. New release reviews and access to our private Discord community. That's digmeoutpodcast.com. And while you're there, suggest an album you think deserves to be featured on a future episode of Dig Me Out. For Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. I'll be back next week with another episode. Up Dig Me Out.